I want to welcome you all to the Policy and Taxation Group Supporters Call and Family Enterprise USA Members Call. It is a very busy, as I just mentioned, an exciting time in Washington, D.C. A lot of things are happening we want to talk about today. And so we, once again, really appreciate your time. As you just heard, the call is being recorded. If you are currently a supporter of Policy and Taxation Group or a member of Family Enterprise USA, thank you so much for your support. If you are not, we ask that you please go on those websites, policyandtaxationgroup.com, familyenterpriseusa.com, and support us, donate us. We really appreciate your support. Today, we are going to talk about the Build Back Better Act. We were going to start with someone from Representative David Scott's office, who's chairman of the Agriculture Committee, but unfortunately she was pulled away just a few minutes ago. So sorry that she will not be speaking with us, as I know she would have been very, very interesting. So go ahead, Karen. We appreciate the update from you.
Sure, and good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of Chairman David Scott's staff, I offer apologies that they are unable to join as a recent former chief of staff to a very busy member of Congress. I completely understand last minute things landing on your desk and throwing your entire schedule off. But we did want to invite Chairman Scott and his staff to join the conversation because he has taken a position in opposition to repealing the step up in basis, which is obviously very relevant to all of you. Chairman Scott, just by way of background, is a member from Atlanta, Georgia. He's also serving this term as the first ever African-American chairman of the Agriculture Committee. He is not only historic in his chairmanship, but has also taken a position of being a very active agriculture chairman, as opposed to just working on the Farm Bill. The committee has been very busy and having regular order and regular hearings, which is a bit of a new way of operating for the Ag Committee. And in June of this year, Chairman Scott actually sent a letter to President Biden expressing his concern over potential tax provisions that might be considered in the reconciliation bill and in general, and particularly a repeal of step up in basis. And his concern around that repeal was the impact that it would have on smaller farmers and ranchers as they attempt to continue the operations of their businesses. And in general, Chairman Scott and some other members of the Congressional Black Caucus have expressed their concern over tax provisions that could potentially harm particularly Black farmers who are just now beginning to build up wealth within their families through their operations, and wanting to make sure that they are not now saddled with tax provisions that would hamper their ability to pass down that generational wealth. So Chairman Scott has certainly been a champion on this issue. We've actually met previously with his legislative director on this issue, Pat has, as the kind of fearless leader of this group. So it's unfortunate that Chairman Scott was unable to join and his staff was pulled into kind of last minute assignments, but we did want to just reassure you of his commitment and make sure you are all aware that we have a champion in him. And I'll yield back my time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. And I don't think we properly introduced you. So Karen Street has been added to our team. She's an excellent add to our team. She is with Squire Patton Boggs. So we really appreciate her help and really appreciate her being on the call with us today.
Sorry, but I just kind of jumped in. Karen Street, I am a principal in the public policy practice group with Brandon Rahman and other illustrious colleagues. I joined the firm in May, having served about 14 years on Capitol Hill, 10 on the Senate side, where I was a colleague of Russ Sullivan as well. And then the last 4 years working either directly or indirectly for the Congressional Black Caucus as an executive director. And I will now yield that Senator Tester is here.
Yes. Thank you again, Karen. So I now see Senator John Tester from Montana is here. Thank you so much for joining us and for your support of family businesses all over the country. I'm going to ask Russ to do a very quick introduction, a little more formal introduction, please.
Oh, we don't do formal with John Tester. We tell you about our buddy. So John Tester, the senior senator from Montana, grew up there. His family's been on a farm in Big Sandy for decades, maybe close to a century. I don't know. He switched to organic farming. He and his wife, 20, 30 years ago, and still active on weekends and congressional breaks in that job. And he is the chairman of the Veterans Committee and was one of the first to vocalize some of the concerns about some of the estate tax provisions that were proposed by the administration and then included in some of the legislation in the House. So Senator Tester has lots of ranchers and farmers in his state, but he's also got lots of other kind of family-owned businesses as well. And Senator Tester, thank you for joining us for a few minutes during your hearing.
Well, Russ, thank you very much. I will just say that I've known Russ for a long time now. That makes us both a little bit older, and you'll be hard pressed to find a better human being than Russ Sullivan. So thanks, Russ. We're connecting at a busy time of year here in Congress, the week before Thanksgiving, and we've got probably 6 or 7 weeks or more to do between now and the end of the year. But this week was a big week. It was a big week for the country as President Biden signed the bipartisan infrastructure bill into law. And I don't need to tell the folks on this Zoom call that the country's infrastructure is overdue for real investment. And it's good to be, this is going to be good for business. It's going to be good for our economy, and it's focused on making sure that we can compete with China, but it needs to be implemented correctly. Negotiations continue on the president's Build Back Better proposal. Bottom line is this: there are a lot of needs across the country, including childcare, housing, addressing climate change, elder care, and more. And we're working on a path forward right now to lower costs for families, create jobs, and address the needs of working people across this country. I've also been working to make sure that any legislation meets the urgent needs of our veterans. I'm in a Veterans Affairs Committee right now. So making sure that any dollars out there meets the needs of our veterans and VA facilities, and that it will help bring more doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals into the VA system, particularly into rural America. We got a lot of work to do to get the Build Back Better legislation ready for prime time. However, I've said from the beginning that any bill we come up with that meets the needs of Montanans and rural communities will be a bill we're supporting. If it doesn't do that, of course, the opposite is true. I've also made it clear that this legislation needs to be paid for. This package needs to work for rural America, and some proposals that my colleagues have put forward would hurt the very people that this package really needs to support. That's why I worked with my colleagues to kill what Russ has already referred to, the stepped up basis provisions of the tax code that would have hurt Montana's family farms, Main Street businesses, small businesses in general. Look, I'm a 3rd generation farmer myself. I have a real job outside the United States Senate. I'm probably the only senator that's actively engaged in agriculture. What's that mean? It means that I'm running the tractor, the combine, the mower, swather, the baler, whatever it might be. So I know firsthand that small family operations need predictability to plan for the transition from generation to generation. Eliminating stepped up basis would have literally wreaked havoc upon rural Montana and made it harder for family farms and ranches to stay in business. The margins are just simply too small. These folks are the backbones of our communities and our economies, and that's why I spoke out against this proposal and told my colleagues that this wouldn't work for rural America. No one should have to sell the farm to stay afloat, and preserving stepped up basis with the help of will help rural Montana stay strong. It'll help rural America stay strong. I spent a number of hours meeting with Chairman Wyden, my own staff, and others to really understand the proposal. Frankly, the more time we spent reviewing it, the clearer it came that this just wouldn't work. I appreciate the input I received from Montanans, and for folks in agriculture and business communities, that type of input is invaluable, and my office will continue to have an open door for those who want to invest in America. Bottom line is this: When I come back to Montana, I hear about roads, bridges, I hear about broadband inadequacies. I hear about water systems that need help. I hear about an electrical grid that needs to be brought up to 21st standards. We got that and more done with the bipartisan infrastructure package. But I also heard about childcare and how it's not accessible and unaffordable when it is accessible. I hear about the cost of housing and the fact that working families can't afford to get into a house anymore because prices have just ballooned over the last 2.5 years. I hear about the fact that elder care is a problem. And I will also tell you that I know from experience that we need to deal with climate change with common sense measures. Why? This was my wife and mine 44th harvest. And quite frankly, it was the worst harvest. We've been on this land my family's been on this land for 110 years. And this is probably the worst harvest that we've ever had. And it's all dealing with drought and extreme weather conditions. So if we're going to stop spending, as the president said the other day, $99 billion a year was spent last year on climate disasters, if we're going to be fiscally responsible, we need to have prudent, and I put the emphasis on prudent proposals put forward to deal with climate change in the short term and the long term. So thank you all for being here. I got to scoot. I got to get back to my VA committee meeting, but don't hesitate to reach out if you have thoughts that I need to know from you. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and it's good to see you again, Russ. Take care.
Thank you very
So-
much, Senator Tester.
Senator, I think Frank Luntz would like to say hello.
Yes, Senator, I haven't seen you forever.
Gosh, you got a beard on, man. What's that about?
That's about my frustration with America. If you know me, when I get really upset about what's going on, I grow a beard.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Frank. That's a big club that you're in. There's a lot of folks frustrated, including myself.
Well, I just wanted to thank you because you're sane, you're sensible, you're centrist. And I'm not trying to be a language guy here, just those are the words that come to mind. And I really wanted to thank you because we've lost our footing and we've lost our civility, we've lost our decency. And you're one of the minority who now still prioritize relationships with people, being decent, being productive. And as a pollster, as someone who has to listen to all this hell, I want you to know that you're one of the good guys. And I applaud you for being decent and human, and thank you for that.
Frank, you're very, very kind, and I'm humbled by that statement. And I thank you for being so kind. And you're right. I mean, we got to get back to a time where relationships matter and we respect the system and that facts are facts, and we can operate off of that kind of a platform. But thank you very much. I appreciate those comments.
Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate your time and your support of family businesses across the United States. Thanks so
You
much.
betcha. Thank you. Take care, you guys. Yeah, bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. So as you've all just heard, Frank Luntz has joined the call, pollster and communicator extraordinaire, and he is going to be talking to us today about the impact of the 2021 elections on 2022. He wants to talk about how America, where they stand on taxes today, spending, infrastructure, and other key issues in the 2021 and 22 cycle. So Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
I'm lucky I came on early. This is
I am
rare for
too.
me. I'm never early, and I usually am sitting there getting so frustrated. And it would have been interesting if this senator had heard what I'm about to tell you, but 2021 was a disaster for the Democrats, and it's a disaster. It's not great for the Republicans. It's a disaster for the Democrats. This was not a vote for the GOP. This was a vote against what's been happening in Washington. And the fact is, since the senator emphasized that facts are facts, one of the key facts that's happening right now is that the public thinks that Washington does not have its act together. They think that there's no strategy, there's no plan. On an individual basis, they do like, not love, but like some of these spending proposals, but they don't like the consequences on them. And there's really a frustration that's building that these are programs that they didn't ask for, they have to pay for. They look at the cost of them, they look at the waste in them, And they want to know that Washington is going to be more efficient, more effective, and more accountable. And for those of you taking notes, that's probably the most important thing that I can say to you right now. More efficient, more effective, and more accountable. And they also believe that Washington should not spend more money until it can prove that what it spends already, it does so well. And they don't believe that it does. 2021 is an endorsement of this organization and the things that you're trying to do. And there are an awful lot of Democrats right now that took this as a wake-up call. I still think that the legislation that's being discussed is going to pass. I still think that there's going to be a tax increase. I still think they're going to be going after you. And it looks like the dividing line is going to be $10 million. If you're making more than $10 million, or if you have more than 50 million in savings, your target of them, because they have to find some way to pay for this. But the challenge right now is to say, when is enough enough? And by the way, that word enough in all caps with an exclamation point is probably the best way to communicate what is happening right now. To ask these questions. Why do we have inflation already kicking up? And by the way, don't call it inflation. These are rising prices. Why is it more expensive to buy milk, to buy bread, to buy eggs? Why are we paying? We are within 2 cents of a record amount for gasoline. And you can't blame this on Donald Trump. You can't blame this on the Republicans. This has always been a nonpartisan organization. But we are now so divided and so polarized. It's one of the reasons why I'm coming to you from Rome, that I've actually been teaching here for the last week. And it's a joy to be out of America. But the public is saying enough. And the race that is most significant for you all is not Virginia, because that was a swing of 12 points. A 10-point Biden victory became a 2-point Republican victory a year later. The bigger swing was actually New Jersey, where it was 16 points for the Democrats. And this time they only won by 2. New Jersey is a solidly Democratic state, voted governor for Chris Christie, has not voted Republican for president in about 40 years. You'd have to go back to Ronald Reagan in 1984, the last time New Jersey voted Republican, and they almost voted Republican in this governor's race. And all across the country, in those local races, Republicans did better, but this is not an endorsement of the Republican philosophy. This is not an endorsement of conservatism or less taxes or less spending. What this is a rejection of the Democrats of higher taxes and higher spending and chaos. So that's really the key point in this. And as Pat says, if you got a question to ask, I'm going to do a couple more minutes and then we'll discuss. The Problem Solvers Caucus is the center. And in fact, Pat, I would send around a list of the members in the House and the Senate from that caucus after this call, because those are the people that matter. If you have them on your side, you have a chance to stop bad legislation and a chance to promote good legislation. The Democrats are moving lockstep. The Democrats are, even though you see this division, which slows up the legislation, the Republicans, thanks to what happened last year, the Republicans can't stop anything without at least one Democrat saying no. And that's why Joe Manchin still matters. That's why Kristen Sinema still matters. That's why having John Tester on here, because he understands the role of family farmers. He understands small business, and he's not a doctrinaire progressive. And the latest example of this, for those of you who believe that we have to hold Washington accountable, the latest example of this is the idea that we're going to pay families who came illegally across the border $1 million apiece to settle a lawsuit, a civil rights lawsuit. They came to this country illegally. If you die in battle, your family gets a $10,000 death benefit. But if you come to America illegally, under the current scheme that the Democrats support, you get $1 million benefit, or you would get $1 million benefit. I think this is going to be even more significant, more impactful than the defund the police effort. But these are the people that are being sent to Washington right now. They think that this is appropriate. They think that this is common sense. And I would find it very difficult for anyone on this call to believe that that's how your tax dollars should be spent. Now let's take this to 2022. In the most recent polling that we have done, we have the Republicans, not as big a gap as the Washington Post, ABC News. And by the way, they're the ones that said that Joe Biden was going to win Wisconsin by 17 points. He actually won it by 1 or 2. So they have always been a pro-Democratic poll. They showed a 10-point Republican advantage in generic ballot. We have it at 6 points. Even if it's even, Republicans win. If the election were held today, Republicans would gain 60 seats in the House. Now they're doing redistricting, and if you're from Illinois, you'll never vote for a Republican because the redistricting in Illinois guarantees that there'll be 14 Democrats and 3 Republicans in the House. The same redistricting is happening in New York. I know that people love to yell at the Republicans for not supporting free and fair elections. The truth is, in redistricting right now, what is happening right now is the Republican states are redistricting to protect Republicans. The Democratic states are redistricting to protect Democrats. And in the end, even though these are Republican states that added the most number of seats, those seats are added in Democratic areas, in urban areas. The rural communities which vote Republican continue to move into Democratic areas of these states. And that's why in the end, it's going to be a wash. But if the election were held today, Republicans would emerge with more than a 50-seat majority. So there's a little bit of a stalling effort that needs to take place. There's a little bit of holding up a mirror to these Democrats on the Problem Solvers Caucus to say, you've already heard from the people. Virginia, Southern state, New Jersey, and Northeastern state, Democratic states that don't vote Republican ever for president have now sent a message that they don't want what's happening right now. The last point I'll make is that in the Senate, I still believe the Senate stays Democrat because the seats that are up, Republicans needed to win that Arizona seat. They didn't. They needed to win the 2 seats in Georgia back last year. They didn't. Thank you, Mr. Trump. And Donald Trump is still lurking behind the scenes. If Trump stays out, Republicans win. Republicans could even win the Senate, but Trump is not going to stay out. And the people that he's supporting are loyal to him, but they're not the best candidates running for office. So Pat, I expect there to be a Republican House in 2022. I expect there to be a Democratic Senate in 2022. But as long as you have divided government, you're not going to have these horrific tax increases, and organizations like yours are not going to be decimated. You've done a lot of good, but you got to keep up the pressure, and specifically either on your home state representatives or the list that Pat will send out to you. So Pat, I'll turn it back to you to answer questions.
Yeah, I have a question for you. It's a really tough question, but why don't you answer the question from Mark? I think it's Pollock. I can't see his full last name in the chat first.
Frank, all these policies you're mentioning are debatable by good and decent people, but how are people voting Republican for candidates who refuse to disavow Donald Trump? Talk about accountability. That is a problem. And the problem for that is if Donald Trump is the deciding factor, the Democrats control Congress. And if they get control again, if they get the House and Senate again, that will be the affirmation that they need to pursue policies that are hostile to the people who are on this call. If you believe that people don't have the right, because Trump is popular in the South, he is popular in the West. You all know me. You know that I'm hostile to him. You know that I'm fighting him all the time. But if that's a litmus test for you, I promise you that Nancy Pelosi, or potentially even someone worse, AOC, is going to be the Speaker of the House. I promise you that Chuck Schumer will be the leader of the Senate. If that is your litmus test, then you are going to have a Democratic majority, and that's going to be a problem. We cannot do litmus tests on either side. The reason why I like John Tester, and he's not, I don't think he's great on your issue, but the reason why I like him is because he listens, because he doesn't do litmus tests, because you can actually sit down with him and have this conversation and he can be moved. He may still support the principle of higher taxation for the wealthiest, but on the details, you can move him because he doesn't do litmus tests. So my answer to you is there must be accountability. And I hope Trump is silent, but I'm not voting against Republicans who refuse to disavow Donald Trump if they have 65 or 70% of their district who loves Donald Trump. That's what a democracy is all about. That's what representative government is all about. That's why we live in the country that we live in. People have a right to be wrong. Actually, I like that, Pat. People have a right to be wrong. That's a good phrase. I'm going to use that in an op-ed.
All right,
Another
I'm going to ask you this hard question that I've wrestled with myself personally. I don't know how to answer, so you may not either, but you and I did some really good work this last August, some of the best work we've done in 25 years around voter attitudes toward the wealthy. And as you know, what you concluded is the enemy is now the wealthy, not the government. And people don't care what the wealthy pay, even if they know how much they pay, they don't care. They still feel they don't pay their fair share. Is there anything that's going to turn that tide? Is there anything? And when we say wealthy, they have no idea. They're talking about a family business that generates thousands of jobs. They're talking about wealth that's not liquid. They see wealth as only liquid. Family businesses are wealth. That's wealth, but it's not liquid wealth. And they employ, as you know, many, many people, millions of people. Is there anything that could help change the attitudes of voters around the wealthy? I mean, in addition to just changing the term wealthy.
Yes, number one is, and this is not rehearsed, so she did not tell me she was going to ask this question. In fact, when I get off, I'm going to send her a really nasty note saying, boy, did you put me on the spot. It's late here. I'm lucky that I had a double espresso with my Coke Zero because I'm prepared to answer your question, but normally this would have been a problem. If people realize that it's the owner of the local restaurant that is being impacted by this, if they realize that the person who started the chain technology store that sells computers and sells televisions and who started with one store and now built it to 21 stores, that they're going to be affected by it. If they realize that these are the small business owners and the entrepreneurs that started with nothing and created things that help us, if that's who they see, then you don't have a problem. The problem is, who do they see? Make that person who asked me that question. They see Donald Trump, or they see Jeff Bezos. They see people with incredible wealth. They see Jeffrey Epstein. They see people who've made money and abused people in the process and treated people badly in the process. And the reason for that is that so many people who are on this, 50 people on this call, who aren't willing to put yourself forward, who aren't willing to say, wait a minute, that's me. Let me tell you my story. Pat, the best thing that you did was actually not the research. It's to create these little documentaries about people who changed our lives and made a difference for thousands, or even tens of thousands of people, and were successful as a result. Those are the stories that need to be told. Those are the people we don't want to punish. Those are the people we want to turn into role models. And my greatest challenge with this organization, because I've been working here since long before I could grow a beard. And the challenge is that so many of you will be on these calls, but you'll be quiet. You'll be hidden. You don't want to speak up because of the media. You don't want to speak up because you'll become a target of Maxine Waters. I get it. But if you're not willing to speak up, then you create the environment by which they can destroy you. So number one is create role models of people who you want children to emulate. Number two, in terms of Washington, is to emphasize what just happened 2 weeks ago. Because every Democrat I talked to since Election Day has said to me, for those of you who are Jewish, Oi Gewalt, which is like, oh my God. they were blown away by what happened. Again, Virginia was not a surprise, but New Jersey was. And by the way, in Minnesota, they had a defund the police initiative that lost in Minnesota, ground zero for George Floyd. All these initiatives across the country, the public voted no for higher taxes. They voted no to this agenda that the left wing of the Democratic Party is on. They voted no. And you have to remind people of that because this is just the beginning. I'm watching people announce their retirement over the last couple of weeks. I know there are going to be 3 more House Democrats, and one of them is going to be a big surprise, that are quitting because they know that they're not going to be a majority. So you have to keep reminding them that you're sowing the seeds of your destruction. And one more point on this. 1994 was predicated on what happened in 93. 2010 is predicated on Chris Christie winning in 2009 and Bob McDonnell. We've seen this before. Only twice in the last 60 years have Republicans successfully beaten the Democrats and taken over the House. Only twice in 60 years. And both times they were successful in Virginia and New Jersey, both times. Well, third time's a charm. And the Democrats that I talk to realize it, which is why they're screaming, let's slow down and let's not do what the left wants us to do in this legislation. So the third point, Pat, is to remind people that history repeats itself.
Mhm. Exactly. Yes, appreciate that. I don't see any questions in the chat. No one has any questions of Frank? That's astounding.
I know, but you realize that less people, every time we do these now, there are less and less people. And then when I meet you all and you tell me you're on the call, you tell me you were so fascinated about the conversation that you just wanted to listen. I'm used to people arguing with me. I'm used to Mark's type of questions, challenging. You got about 15 seconds or Pat's going to move on, which is not so bad, but you sure you got nothing here? There you go.
Okay, you have a question from Tony Rose
The estate
and
tax,
Richard.
the estate tax stuff might be held off, but the income tax issue might still be so hurtful. I can't help you on that. The only thing I
Yeah.
can say to you is it's really striking the top 1/10 of 1%, which is a lot of people who are on this call. They have to raise taxes somewhere, so they're going to go after that. However, they've basically committed to only affecting 10 million and above. And they're going to try to do this with corporations. So watch the details on corporate taxes. I think you're okay for now. I don't think you can, by the way, I am going to pitch you on being involved in this election that's coming up. Not now, but you're going to hear from me in June, July, August. Because if you fail, they will go after you. And this time they'll get it. If they can keep control of Congress, they'll get it. But I can't save you on income taxes, not with over $10 million. And if that hurts you, that's just the way it is. Be thankful that it looks like they've dropped the billionaires tax, that they're not going to try to force you to itemize everything you own, because that would ruin so many lives. It would be so impossible and people would end up in jail because they would simply make mistakes. I'm glad that each one of these, as it gets raised, gets knocked down. And Pat, I'm always negative. I'm always critical. I got to believe that the effort that you have made over the last, let's say 10 years, even though it goes back 25, to remind people that the devil's in the details makes a difference. And in one senator, which I cannot tell you who it is, we discussed those details because that senator intellectually believes that it's okay to raise taxes on the wealthiest, which is the 1/10 of 1%. But he personally got into the weeds about some of the estate tax stuff, personally engaged in it, and said, you cannot do this, and challenged and forced the Democrats to make some decisions there. So Pat, the effort that you're putting in is bearing fruit now, but honestly, at some point, people are going to have to pay more. You can't.
Well,
be
the
an
problem with the problem with the income tax and the surtax of the 5% and the 3% is while it's 10 million and 25 million per person, trust and estates threshold is only 200,000 and 500,000. So if you have only 200,000 in income from a trust, you're going to pay a 5% surtax. And if you have 500,000, you pay another 3% on top of that. We're working really hard on those. Makes no sense to have those low thresholds for trust and estate. So Tony's question is a really valid question. So why don't you address Richard's Horwitz's question, and then I will have to probably let Frank go.
Okay, and you guys who do the policy stuff, I'm a communication guy, I'm a language guy, I'm not a policy guy. So there probably should be someone else on the call who answers that. How can the Trump juggernaut be stopped? Buy Jonathan Karl's book. Literally, it's called Betrayal. I'm pushing it very hard because no Republican will ever vote for Donald Trump after they read that book. That's how you stop it, is by telling people the truth. Does not mean that you're still going to have 1 out of 3 Republicans thinking the election was stolen, but that's a lot better than 60%, which is where it was 6 months ago. People are coming to the realization that he's a fraud. People are coming to the realization that he lies, but it takes time. And books like Jonathan Karl's book makes a difference. I would tell you to read it. Betrayal. It's number 2 on Barnes & Noble, and it was number 6 on Amazon. It just came out yesterday. And last, based on the state of information and social media, how do you suggest family businesses best share their stories with the public? By creating these 5-minute videos that you put out on YouTube, which is the truth about, and I would actually call it that, the truth about family business, the truth about family business owners. And what we learned is that whole idea of a family business generation, this is a sacrifice from generation to generation, is actually a great way to communicate it, because it's the one thing that we really do support, the idea that a business can be passed down, that we can have multi-generations being involved in our communities and being involved in building opportunity for others. That's the best way to communicate what you're trying to protect. So Pat, thank you for letting me do this. I apologize because I know I went on 11 minutes too long, but I talk too much.
No, it was great. It was great. Thank you so much, Frank. We really appreciate you being on. And now go get some sleep as you're in London. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be in touch. Oh, by the way, Frank and I are going to be speaking together on February 23rd at the Lido Consulting event in LA. So if you're in LA, February 23rd, it's called Lido Consulting.
It has to be the 23rd.
I know, that's Frank's birthday.
It's my 60th birthday. I don't
Wow.
want
We'll
it
do something really special.
I'm hoping you'll move it to the 24th, because the conference goes from the 23rd to the 25th.
Right.
So let's try to do it the day that isn't my birthday.
All right, I'll work on that. Okay.
And
All
I
right.
responded.
Take care.
The name of the book is called Betrayal. See you guys.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. And Angela, I would just reiterate your comment about, do you suggest family businesses share their stories? You heard Frank. I would say yes, 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 absolutely yes. He's right. We've done these videos. They're very impactful. They're on YouTube. We need the family stories. It's the only thing that's going to convince the voter that families generate jobs. And even though they may have wealth because they have a business, we need them in this community. They generate 59% of the workforce in this world, in this country, and 54% of the GDP. So tell your stories. So, okay, Brandon and Russ are now going to talk to us about the Build Back Better Act, what was going to be in it, what's in it, what's the timeline, and I think Daniel's going to go ahead and share the slides. So I'll turn it all over to you now.
Great, thanks, Pat. And Russ, I think if it's okay, Daniel, I think we want to start with slide 13, which I believe is the beginning of what's included. And then we're going to go back to Russ to talk about what is not included and give his unique insight and use his crystal ball as to what's going to be happening down the road. But again, just to kind of set up the current state of play, as you all know, when we engaged at the beginning of this process, we were focused on, a subset of issues. Obviously, we're keeping repeal of, we're avoiding repeal of step up, trying to avoid any changes to the estate tax, obviously also opposing a wealth tax. Over the last several months, we've seen an evolution of the developing policies that were included through various iterations of the proposed bill and even the Rules Committee drafts of the legislation. That's largely been driven by the fact that there's very little margin for error in the Democratic caucus. As you know, there's only a several seat majority in the House, and in the Senate, there is zero room for error because every single one of the 50 Democratic senators has to support the legislation for it to be able to pass even through the lower threshold under reconciliation procedures. Because of that, again, we've seen an evolution in the policies that are actually included, and the House is poised this week to potentially consider and pass the legislation. They're largely right now waiting for the score from the Congressional Budget Office because it's a demand of the House moderates to make sure that this is something that is not viewed as adding significantly to the national deficit. So that being said, again, I'll kind of start really as to what is included in the bill, and this is a nice snapshot just to show you some of the main provisions in the bill. And you'll notice some were not included in the original proposal, and some were included and are no longer there. I won't spend much time talking about those that are no longer there because Russ is going to talk about it, but they're and we'll go through a little bit more detail in the next slides. But a few of the ones that will raise significant revenue on the pay for side. So the expansion of the net investment income tax raises, and the current draft estimated $250 billion. There is a surcharge on high net worth individuals. There's 5%, an additional 3%, depending upon your income. That would raise $230 billion. There's limitations on business losses, which raise an estimated $160 billion. As you'll notice, there's no longer any provisions. Again, Russ can discuss this in greater detail, but on the capital gains or individual tax rates that would be included, which totals, at least as of now, about $660 billion from some of the key pieces that are of interest to this group. So we can go on to the next slide. One thing that's not on there, but that is still being, that's not on that initial chart, but that is still being discussed and evolving, is the the cap on state and local tax deductions. As everybody will, I'm sure, recall, in tax reform, there was a cap put in place on the state and local tax deduction of $10,000. The House proposal would raise that to $80,000 for the 10-year scoring window, and then snap back to $10,000 in 2031. The Senate, as I mentioned, there are various competing proposals. The two I think that are getting the most attention are from Senator Sanders and Senator Menendez, which would restrict the ability to use this for high-income individuals. So for under Senator Sanders' plan, it would permanently increase the deduction for families under the $400,000 threshold, and then those above that would not be eligible for the deduction. Senator Menendez would have a little bit of a different threshold. They would be eligible for an exemption for the cap if you were under $1 million in income, and then families with more than $1 million in income could be eligible for a partial deduction, I think largely depending upon what the numbers look like from a scoring perspective. If we go to the next slide, as I mentioned, there would be an expansion on the net investment income. So it would expand the 3.8% net investment income tax to both active and inactive business owners. And this would apply importantly to income, but also trusts, estates, and then also certain foreign derived income. And then just for a reference, the specified net income is the sum of gross income from interest, dividends, annuities, royalties, and rents, and then other gross income from trades or business, and then also the net gain attributable to the disposition of property. So we go on to the next slide. This is what I was referencing. And again, Russ will talk about this here in a minute in terms of what this replaced. But in terms of kind of getting at the billionaires and millionaires, which is one of the big talking points for the Democratic Party and raising funds for this bill, there's a surcharge on the income of high income individuals. So the first would be the kind of a tiered structure. So it would be a 5% surcharge on the modified adjusted gross income for those that are married filing separately of $5 million. But then the critical piece here is this $200,000 for estates or trusts. And Pat referenced that at the end of our discussion with Frank, something that we're working on, and probably the biggest issue I think for the members here, having had significant success in our efforts thus far of preventing bad policies from moving forward. And then again, $10 million for all other cases. there would be an additional on top of that 3% surcharge on the modified adjusted gross income over $12.5 million for married couples, for married taxpayer filing separately. And then again, $500,000, which is significantly lower than the threshold for individuals for estates and trusts, and then $25 million for all other instances. And this would apply to income, capital gains, and trusts. Again, so if you look at this, kind of combining the net investment income tax plus this surcharge, plus the top income rate of which is going to maintain at 39.6%, would be a top rate of for some that the kind of highest earners of almost 50%, so 46.4%. So significantly higher than what we see right now. If you go to the next slide, there were some business loss limitations that were included in tax reform. This would make those for non-corporate taxpayers permanent, but also modify those and to allow disallowed losses for a particular year to be carried forward as part of the aggregate deduction. And then there's also some special rules put in place upon the termination of a trust or an estate that allow the excess business loss to carry over to be allowed to be used as a deduction to the beneficiaries who are receiving the property of the estate or trust. If we go on to the next one, so with regard to retirement plans, just being mindful of the time here, I'll go through these just kind of quickly, but again, there's some contribution limits and then also distributions that are required for individual retirement plans of high income individuals. That threshold is $400,000. So essentially the way that this works is that you're not allowed to add any funds to your IRAs after the or other accounts after the aggregate balance reaches $10 million. So if you have an account that has a balance of more than $20 million, you'd have to distribute all of that amount above $20 million each year, and then 50% of the amounts above $10 million in all defined contributions, regardless of your age. Going to the next slide, there's a couple additional changes on restrictions to Roth rollovers. I think that slide may have been removed, but in terms of those restrictions, there again are some limitations. Basically, it's designed to kind of close the quote unquote backdoor Roth IRA loopholes. So taxpayers, there were some treatments to kind of close those loopholes in terms of who is able to roll over what into an IRA. So I think again, this kind of maybe shifts to Russ. So I'll just say, kind of to conclude my remarks. Again, I think we'll see as Russ goes through this, with a lot of success from our efforts. We're in a very good position. There are still a few things we'd like to see removed, but overall, thanks to your support, we were successful in protecting many of the provisions of particular interest to this group. So Russ will go through those now.
Great. Well, good afternoon. I get to tell you the good news of the work that Pat Soldano organized us all to do. We were not alone out there on the battlefield, but we were a leader in the battle. And so thank you for your support in enabling us to do this on your behalf and other family-owned businesses. But there were a lot of provisions that were included in the original House bill. You complained about them. A lot of people complained about them. Pat mobilized and got to work. And the result is that 4 categories of proposals that Democrats in the House put together were entirely removed from the bill when they reached an agreement with the White House and the Senate on a regular basic framework of the bill. Now, there are lots of reasons for this. It couldn't happen unless Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and Senator Tester and Senator Hassan and Cortez Masto and a few of them said, we're not doing a $3.5 trillion bill. Reducing that to 1.5 or 1.75 enabled there to be not a need for so many revenue raisers. So that allows them to eliminate some of them. But there was lots of competition for what should be eliminated. And so we were engaged on your behalf to sort of get rid of the ones we thought were the worst. Well, here, I'm going to tell you which ones got eliminated and who's responsible for getting them eliminated. So there's 4. There's the top bracket going up from 37% to 39.6%. This is due solely to Kyrsten Sinema, the woman on the previous slide. She's a Democrat from Arizona. She served in the House for a few years, ran for a Senate seat, won it. It's John McCain's old seat. And she had just always had a view that marginal tax rate increases on individuals and corporations are not good for the economy. They're certainly not good, particularly during and immediately after a pandemic when we're trying to recover from a recession of sorts. So that's who's responsible for that one. Next slide. The next category that was eliminated is capital gains. President Biden proposed, remember, 39.6. There was a lot of talk about 28%. Even Senator Manchin said, maybe I can live with 28%. It used to be President Reagan increased it to 28% back in 1986. But the House went with 25%. And then Senator Sinema said, there'll be no increase in capital gains if you want my vote. And they had to have her vote. They had to have every vote. And it took them a while to realize she was serious, but she did. She convinced them. And so there's no capital gains increase except under the surtaxes, which Pat and Brandon talk about. Those are applicable to capital gains. So if you're over that 10 million threshold or that 25 million threshold, your capital gains rate will go up by those 5 and 3%. Next slide. The third thing that was eliminated was 199A reform. You remember Senator Wyden from the Senate, chair of the Finance Committee, proposed that nobody over $400,000 get the 199A deduction for 20% of your profits from your pass-through business. Now, the House proposed a different version. It said, you can get it up to that amount, but you can't get any more for profits above the 400,000. And they actually used 500,000 for some of the thresholds as well. But Senator Sinema, as well as some others, balked at the 199A reform. And so a group of them persuaded Senator Schumer to tell Speaker Pelosi, this one's got to come out. And Biden agreed. And then finally, we've got the estate and gift tax provision, which is where it all started for us on the PATG side. So you remember the first thing was the step up in basis. It didn't even make it into the House bill because of the leadership of folks like Representative Scott in the House and Senator Tester in the Senate. But there were these other provisions, the unified credit being sunset early and going back to the $5 or $6 million level, valuation discounts, which were banned under the House bill, grantor trust, which would basically eliminate their use for estate planning. All of those provisions in the House bill, none of them in the bill that's going to the House floor. Why? A number of people. Senator Schumer actually heard from 5 Democratic senators who were strongly opposed to including anything on the estate and gift side. We haven't identified all of them. We do know Senator Sinema was one. We know Senator Tester was another. And there were other people that they recruited or that weighed in as well. And so these provisions are not in the bill. We hope they're not going to return. We think they're not going to return, but we're not giving up. We're going to keep pounding every week to make sure that they do not. So those are the items that went away. There's one more that was mentioned briefly, and that is Senator Wyden at one point floated his mark-to-market proposal as a substitute for some of the changes that came out of the bill, the revenue raisers. This didn't last long due to Senator Manchin, Senator Tester, and several others who stepped up and said, I don't think that's a good idea. So we have more time to try to kill this proposal permanently, but this did not make it into the bill.
So Russ, I have a question that I'm sure most people want to hear about, and that is, what is the timing? You and I were on a staff call this morning, and he seemed to indicate that, he didn't think things would be done by Christmas, but why don't you walk us through what the timing and the schedule is?
Yeah, so the House is likely to vote this weekend. They're going to get scores from the Congressional Budget Office on their bill that will inform the moderates as to whether they accept the bill. They want to make sure the bill is paid for and it's not too expensive. Then the bill will come to the Senate. Senator Schumer and all the committee chairs have already been working on the essence of a bill, but they have a lot of issues that are not resolved. We mentioned the SALT one, that's an example, but there are a lot of those. The bill will get smaller in the Senate, but it will take them several weeks, probably the full month of December at best, to get to a bill that all 50 will support. So Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, and others have been vocal during the House process. Other senators said, I'll wait my turn. I'll wait till the bill comes to the Senate, and then I'll exert my privilege to represent my state and make other changes. Some want to add things into the bill spending. Some want to add tax cuts. Some want to eliminate tax increases. And so it's just going to take a while for them to get that to happen. So at best, the Senate will pass a bill close to Christmas Eve. And then the House will have to decide whether to just take the Senate bill, which they might, or if they think they cut out something that they really need, they can call for a conference. And there'd be a conference between the House and the Senate. Or they can make a minor change and pass the bill with just a minor change and send it back to the Senate. So I think it's going to take really at least till close to New Year's Day and maybe a few days beyond into early 2022 before this bill finally passes.
And I suspect the longer it gets into 2022, the more diverted everybody's going to be toward the 2022 elections, right?
And no doubt, and the less likely it is to pass at all. I still think there's 85% chance it's going to pass. But the longer it goes, the more a Democrat who is running for re-election but has a primary opponent in the Democratic primary, and either from the left or the right, they may decide that just voting no is the best strategy for them.
Yeah. Appreciate that from both you and Brandon. Do either of you have any kind of closing comments? I don't see any questions in the chat at this point.
Now, thank you all for your attention and patience, and we enjoyed the discussion.
I guess there is one question in the Q&A I should have checked, and that's from Don, and I think it may have been for Frank, but I think you guys may be better to answer this, is New Hampshire Senate prediction.
Yeah, so I think had Chris Sununu, the sitting governor, decided to run for Senate against Maggie Hassan, he would have been the favorite. And all the contours of it being a off presidential year and the fact that she's a first termer would have worked against her. He's a fairly popular governor. And so I would have said he's the favorite to win. Without him in the race, it's not clear whether how close the race will be. I still think it'll be close and the Republican could win, but we don't know who that's going to be yet. So Maggie Hassan, along with several other Democrats who are finishing their first term, don't have great poll numbers against a generic Republican. So, and this is not all their fault. It's part a referendum on the Biden administration and the economy, and that the pandemic isn't over. So we'll have a number of those races that will just have to evolve. Frank seemed to lean toward the Democrats retaining the Senate. I'm on the other side. I'm the Democrat, but I'll say I think it's more likely the Republicans are going to take the Senate too.
Interesting. Okay, well, thank you all, Russ, Brandon, Daniel, everybody that's contributed to this call. I really appreciate it, and all the hard work that you've done in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much. And thank you for all of you being on the call. And once again, for your support. We couldn't do it without you. So we really appreciate it. Both Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. Take care and have a good rest of your day.